Good evening, bonsoir. I'm Ross Hornby, and I'm going to talk about something I call the democratization of energy. How many of you remember the John Lennon song, Power to the People? Quite a few. So who would have thought that those lyrics, which originated in the protest movement against the Vietnam War and were recorded in 1970, sum up what's happening today in 2016 in the energy market? There's a wave of decentralization that is having an effect on all parts of our lives. We've talked about the Uberization of the transportation system. Well, it's also changing the way that we generate electricity. Another, not John Lennon perhaps, but another Canadian thinker, Marshall McLuhan, the guy who talked about the medium is the message, he also referred to the global village. And basically what he said is that the more universal our societies become, the more there is a drive for community, the more there is a need to create our own villages within that global village. And he said that when you think about it, 40 years before the internet and the wave of globalization that took place over the past decades. This need to affirm local autonomy is impacting the energy sector just like it's impacting other parts of modern life. And we see what its negative side is. In politics, we see isolationism, we see nativism, but it also has a positive side, and that's the demand for more choice in society, more control over our lives, and customization of results. It also is a demand for a more equitable society. So in the electricity market, what we are seeing is a move from centralized to what we call distributed power. Distributed power is defined as power generated at or near its source of consumption. And this is revolutionizing the entire structure of electricity, the way that utilities relate to their customers, and the way that communities and individuals are participating in the sector. That's why I call it the democratization of electricity, and it truly does mean power to the people. I'm going to talk about two aspects of this. One, the technology that's making it possible, and two, the societal changes that are creating the demand for this. Well, in the technology, in the last 10 years, distributed energy technologies have become more efficient, they're more affordable, and they're smaller scale, and that is really important. They can be right-sized now for community applications. So what are they? Well, one example is our small-scale wind farms. These aren't the big utility-scaled wind farms that you see on the horizon, but only having the number of turbines that you need that are necessary to power a small city, a suburb, a village, or an industrial operation like a mine, or even an island community. And another example is Run-of-the-River Hydro. These are small-scale hydro projects that generate enough power on a year-round basis to run a town or an Indigenous community, and I'll come back to that. And no technology has been more disruptive than photovoltaic solar. The cost has come down so dramatically that solar is now a viable option for farms, factories, and communities. And yes, believe it or not, we do have enough sun in Canada for solar. So you might ask, okay, well, what happens when the wind doesn't blow or the sun doesn't shine? Well, when paired with battery storage or backup from small turbines that can burn either gas or biofuel, and with the help of digital tools that integrate these various power sources, you can have a reliable off-grid system. And the advantage of distributed power is that it avoids the high capital costs of utility-scaled wind farms or hydro developments or nuclear, and the expense and the impact of long-distance transmission lines. So all this can result in an electricity system that is lower cost, generates fewer emissions, and has greater resiliency and is adaptable to different social needs. So that's the technology that is making this happen. What are those societal changes? Well, I already talked about the desire of people to belong to a unique community in our global village and have greater control over their lives. Another societal trend that I referred to is the demand for equity that is really driving change in the electricity market. And this demand for equity is heard from northern remote communities who don't want to be reliant on expensive and dirty diesel generation, islands who want reliable, cheaper local sources of power, developing countries that are seeking to lift their people out of energy poverty, but they don't have the capital to build mega projects. And it's even heard from urban dwellers and suburbanites who want cleaner, greener power and more control over its costs and greater resiliency in the electricity system in the event of natural disasters. I'm sure some of you in the room remember the ice storm. So I'm just going to give you a few examples of where this is actually happening today. Tiaglam is a small town of 300 residents in South Australia, and it wants to disconnect from the Australian power grid. It will be the first community in Australia to be powered completely by solar power. A local entrepreneur launched the project, but a combination of price, reliability, and environmental impact encouraged residents to back the project. It's going to have lower cost. The town is reliant on seasonal work and tourism, so there are few stable jobs, and high electricity bills from the state utility really hurts people. This project will have 0 GHG emissions versus the coal-fired grid. And collectively, the 300 residents are going to save $400,000 a year. So the infrastructure to build this system is going to cost around $5 million. So the payback will be in just 10 to 12 years. And then take India, much larger scale than a town of 300. 50% of India's rural population has no access to grid-based electricity. Most people rely on kerosene to light their homes and to use it as a cooking fuel. And due to increasing affordability, nearly 5 million solar homes are going to be built between now and 2018, and the pace is going to pick up after that to 3 million units a year. So this unmet desire for electricity presents a huge opportunity to suppliers of off-grid renewable energy. So clearly there is a business case for this change as well as a moral imperative. Closer to home, Summerside PEI has implemented a smart grid project that is based on a local wind farm. The city uses electrical thermal storage and smart grid technology to use excess wind energy for residential and hot water heating. So what the residents do is they download electricity at night when it's less expensive, and then they use it during the day. The cost is 8 cents a kilowatt hour versus 12 cents from the public utility. So as a result, 40% of Summerside's electricity comes from renewable sources. And remote communities, I said I would return to that. In northern Indigenous communities in Canada rely almost exclusively on diesel generation. Small-scale wind turbines, solar panels with backup from small-scale gas turbines can help these communities meet their goal of a secure, reliable source of power. And the economics will work, especially where the communities are in proximity to mines or forestry operations, where the cost burden can be shared with the private sector. And this isn't a dream for the future. The federal government, the provinces and the territories, and groups like WWF and others are actively doing feasibility studies with Indigenous communities right now. I was just in Alberta, where the utility in the north of the province has done an inventory of all the towns and Indigenous communities that could move off diesel soon. And we've already done a project in Yukon where small-scale LNG power is shared between a local Indigenous community and a mine, freeing the community from diesel generation, lowering its costs, and lowering GHG emissions by 60%. So in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to quote John Lennon again. He was a dreamer, to cite another one of his songs. But power to the people is here, it's real, and it's today. Through distributed power options, localized wind, solar, hydro, some backup from fossil fuel, with the latest digital technology and machines, we are responding to a societal demand for independence and equity. We are truly democratizing electricity. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.